React has taken the world by storm. It is the unstoppable tide that is sweeping over the world, leaving nothing untouched. Back in the dark ages, when the user would go to a website, the server would render the whole page and send it to the user. The user then would click on something interactive. The server had to render this whole page again and send it back with this minute change. While there were things before it, React fundamentally changed this approach and made it super efficient. One of the biggest strengths that React pioneered is the virtual DOM. DOM stands for Document Object Model, and it's basically the HTML as a tree that renders every page. The amazing thing that React does is that it takes a snapshot of this DOM and creates a virtual DOM, basically a JavaScript object. When a user does a change that requires interactivity, React then compares this virtual DOM to the change and only updates where necessary. And on top of all of this, React has a vibrant ecosystem, maybe too vibrant, because there's maybe 5 or 10 different routing libraries alone, and you will often have analysis paralysis. At the same time, the community is amazing. You will find many resources wherever you're looking, whether that's on YouTube, Stack Overflow, or somewhere else. Initially, when React started off, it was all class-based components, and then there was a big shift where then functional components were introduced. Functional components have much less boilerplate, and they have some tricky parts, but overall they're really amazing, and they can decouple the state from the actual component. I'm gonna quickly show you what I mean by class-based components by writing one down. These things always take a constructor, and the constructor is what takes props. More on props in a bit. Props are basically how you pass data from one component to the other. And it's super annoying, you have to pass it down here too. So now we have a super simple component. However, the world is not simple, so let's add some features to it. So now I added some state to it, which is some name, my name in this case. And now let's add the feature to change the name. So this is roughly how you would change the state. And this is the one big benefit that the components had, one of the two big benefits, that the set state is fairly simple. But what happens now? So this is one of the really annoying parts. You actually have to bind this to the functions. Because this function is taking this, but it doesn't know where this is coming from. So you have to bind it. Quite annoying. And there we go, other name. If you want to make an API call, maybe for the initial name or whatever, you can use component did mount. It was will mount, but yeah, it changed. Component did mount and setting the state. These were the vital things you would do all the time in React, and it was quite nice because it was quite simple. However, this is a lot of boilerplate code, and we want to change that. Now we're at our Hello World example again. But let's add the state. How do we do that? The big thing functional components brought to React were hooks. Hooks decouple the state of the component from the component or markup of the actual component itself. This is super useful. And there are some out-of-the-box hooks that we're going to use now, and you can also use your custom hooks, which is vital. So first let's create the state for the name. Actually, by now let's use the counter. And let's also add the method for adding the counter. So this is how simple it is to, actually I forgot this. So this is how simple it is to do basically the same thing before. We can really easily add a counter, and we have these hooks, in this case the useState hook. Component did mount was a really important lifecycle hook for basically API calls. Now you would do the same way like so. And now what will happen is this will render every time, because this takes a dependency array, but if this is missing, it will just fire like all the time. So what we can do is, if we only wanted to fire once, quotation mark, is we can add an empty dependency array. Use effect, will fire every time this dependency array changes. So it's not gonna fire now, but it is gonna fire now. It fires twice, but this is a quirk of React where in the developer mode it will fire twice to simulate some stuff. In production it will only fire once. We can also add a counter here, and now it will fire API call whenever we click it. And now comes a big beauty, custom hooks. With these you can decouple your logic and state and so on into the custom hook. You have to prepend them with the use. This is really important, otherwise it's going to complain. And there you go. Now we successfully factored all this logic that was in here into this custom hook that we could move to a different file, reusing a different component, and so on and so forth. Custom hooks, basically what differentiates them from a function is that they use some sort of React hooks. As long as your function uses React hooks, it has to be the function has to be a custom hook. And one thing to note is that these hooks, they cannot run conditional. Also, a crucial part of React is the composition. It's similar to functions, how in programming we split up our existing code into functions for various benefits, and the same logic applies here. Maintainability is a big reason to split your components into different parts. Separations of concerns, of course, flexibility, and a really big reason is performance reason. So remember how I talked about the virtual DOM? With React, it will only update the components that have actually changed. It knows this by the props. If the props change and the props go down to a component, then it will update this component. If the props don't go a certain component, it will not update that component. So you can make your app more performant by splitting it up into different components that take their props. I'm gonna show you what I mean here exactly. So let's see what I'm talking about. This is also the unrealistic beauty of functional components. You can keep stuff very small, but it's this kind of notation, I almost never use it, where I merely have like this one thing here. And there you go, we've split some parts of our app into different components. And now let's see how we can split up the actual body into its own component and what this brings to. This is a very classic React example. First, you can't really return the list. You always have to return only one component that can have children. And you can use these fragments, they're called. So now you have this main, which takes these things. They will be props. And how do you exactly do this? You can pass them down like so. And these will now be attached to the props object that these components take. And this is how you can use them. However, what we like to do is we like to destruct them. Beautiful, it's still working. So this is what you do here. And now we can talk also a bit about prop dueling and nesting. So now it's still all working, but we are prop dueling from above here, the counter down here, down here, down here, down here. And this used to be super common. It's quite annoying, and there are now many ways around this. But yeah, this just illustrates the classic React challenge of always drilling down your properties. The solutions, by the way, usually are to have your logic where it's used. So to move this hook down here or reuse it, or usually this is data that is needed. There's a library called React Query that I made a video about that is super helpful. And finally, I'm gonna very briefly talk about styling. There are many, many different ways to add styling to your React components. Traditionally, you could use the typical external style sheets. What I used a lot was the inline styles, which you do like so. And there you go, you have the green background. However, you have many different ways. Styled components became super popular and are widely used. They're basically a library that you have to install where you can use CSS directly into your components, and you can use render logic in it. There's Atomic CSS with libraries such as Tailwind, where you can give class names that reference chunks of CSS. And there's something I quite like, prop-based. With all these approaches, also React with composition offers you the ability to wrap components into different layers. One might be the functionality, the other one might be the styling, but it's out of the scope of this video. So I'm going to highlight this in a different video. So be sure to stick around for that. And yeah, that wraps it up for now. I hope you found this useful and hope you have a great day. Bye.